Hi, everyone. It's Adrienne Metz with Paylode, and I'm here with Joe Oliveri of Volution. And you are based, where are you based, Joe?
Back in Brisbane at the moment, so I go
Okay.
back and forwards between Australia and the USA.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Mm.
And tell me a little bit about yourself and a revolution.
Yeah, okay. Well, I've been in the property management industry for about 30 years now. Um, and I started there after having my husband and I had a family business. And that was back in the 80s when things went a bit awry with banks and high interest and we lost our business. And I was looking for something that I could do. And I started in property management and having a bit of a business background, I was a little bit shocked at the way that I started. And that was I did theoretical training and then I was given a portfolio of properties to manage and there was no practical training. Um,
Wow.
yes,
Both feet first,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
exactly. And there was, three property managers there in the company that I was working for, and everyone was telling me something different. And I thought, this doesn't work in business. And that kind of set me off on this pathway of learning. I had a goal back then when I started of doing exactly what I'm doing today. And that is, I'm a coach and a consultant, and I travel internationally and I learn from other industries and bring it all back into the space of property management. So, yeah, I've been a coach consultant in my own business now since 2009. Um, and just love what I do. I feel heartbroken that we still have these negative conversations in property management that, the job is too stressful and, burns people out. That shouldn't be happening. But for me personally, the journey of business coach and consultant has just been one where I just feel so blessed to be chosen by this industry. And I say chosen because it really feels like it is part of my DNA. And everything that happens, good or bad, and lots of bad things happen too, but they're not bad in that they're always teaching me. It's like, how could that happen? And then I find a solution to ensure that doesn't happen again. So, when I launched my business, excuse me, it's 6 a.m. here in Australia. When I launched my business, my son actually came up with the name, and IrevilOution is Oliveri backwards. And I always said I'd create a revolution in the industry. So it kind of all work together. So it's an anti-revolution, but it
I
just
love
fitted
it.
well with my name.
You probably save companies a lot of headache and complications having bringing all of your kind of been there, done that expertise to your consulting. So I'm sure it's much needed.
Yes, well,
Okay.
it keeps me busy, so that's always good. And to know that companies that approach me, and I've been working with some of them, for the whole time. They keep coming back to me when they go off path a little bit. And to see them still around and thriving is wonderful. I think it's magical, and to see that they're enjoying it too.
That's awesome. So you talked a little bit about how, it hurts you to see this kind of tension or animosity in the space. Tell me a little bit more about, the landlord versus the property manager. Whose job is it to make sure tenants feel at home in their living space?
That is such a great question because there is so much misunderstanding in that kind of like area. And a lot of the times, the actual landlord or rental owner is blamed by the property manager for not doing something. And, that should never happen. There should never ever be blame, excuse, or justification in the service that we're providing. And it really is, if we look at that question, it's both the rental property owners or the landlords' responsibility and the property managers. But it comes back to the property manager, because the property manager is responsible for educating the landlord. So if the landlord doesn't know, then the landlord just thinks, well, I don't have to do that, or I can take my own time in, getting something resolved. So if we bring it all back to the very beginning, the best relationships are created when a spirit of cooperation and understanding is created from the first interaction. And that comes back to induction or onboarding. So when a new client is brought into a company, there needs to be a very thorough process of induction and understanding. It's like, as a rental property owner, you are responsible for this. As property managers, we are responsible for ensuring that the tenant has quiet enjoyment of the property. And if the tenant has quiet enjoyment, what that means is this, that repairs are done. And it doesn't mean to say that the neighbours have to be quiet. Quiet enjoyment is actually about their experience in the property. So property managers have to actually be very courageous in their conversations with owners, because a lot of property managers will say, I couldn't get a hold of the owner, or, the owner, just was ignoring my requests and would say they'd come back to me. So under a contract, a management agreement, it actually states that in the absence of owners, property managers are responsible for acting on the owner's behalf in their best interests. So if that is all discussed up front, then owners will understand that at times property managers have to act swiftly or act within a time frame to ensure that whatever is,
Right.
on the table is completed or resolved.
Right. If a pipe has burst, you don't have time to compare vendors. You have to get somebody in, right? So,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
so you talked a little bit about quiet enjoyment, and I love that term because it just says so much. And it takes a lot from the very first interaction to proactively keep your best tenants. How do you create a space that is conducive to quiet enjoyment, where at the end of the lease, a tenant is saying, gosh, I could move, but I would really like to stay here. How do you foster that proactively?
Yeah, and again, that comes back to when the tenant first moves into a property, one, the induction, and two, ensuring that that property is representative of the way it was marketed. And also kind of like going back a step further, where that property is, shown at its absolute peak. So, a lot of times we see property managers using old photos, and the reality is when people go in, they're like, oh, there's actually a lot of wear and tear. Now, messy is okay, because messy is cleaned when the prior tenant moves out or the owner moves out. But when you see a property in its raw state and it's, got chipped walls and stained carpets and broken cupboard hinges and all those things, it starts the rental experience off on a bad foot, a bit of a sour note. And sour notes tend to go even more sour. And tenants can hold a grudge as well. It's like, well, it was like that when I moved in. So
Right.
what do you expect when I move out? And you took this long to respond to something, or you never responded. And so there's again, it's the blame game. So for a tenant to have that great experience, work with the owner in making sure that that property is pristine. I mean, there will be wear and tear. Properties get old, but even old properties look beautiful. So, make sure that property is appealing, and make sure that when you do the move-in report, it completely represents the condition of that property. Don't move a tenant in and say that you'll do things later. it needs to be done before the tenant moves in. And, if we kind of like go back a step in doing that, I won't go through that today because that's a whole new conversation on how we do that. But, like before the tenant moves in, there also needs to be that very, very formal induction. The induction is not just about the lease that they're signing. The induction is about what the company's policies, processes, protocols are, timelines for things being done, expectations. Like if you've got an expectation that the tenant will never ever roll over into a periodic lease, then, the expectations on those tenants are by a certain date, they've got to sign the renewal or they
Hmm.
will find that they'll be given a notice to terminate.
Right.
So it all comes back to that getting things right, representing
Yeah.
the property accurately, and induction. It's really important for both the owner and the tenant.
So clarifying expectations really is part of setting a great first impression. It's
Yes,
about here's what, we're responsible for and here's what we expect of you and what you're responsible for.
exactly.
So if those are the table stakes, then how does a property manager stand out in 2024, especially in places where there's more inventory than demand?
Yes, so I always, because I'm Disney trained, so I've been to the Disney Institute and I've learnt how Disney stands out amongst all the theme parks and why people will go there and spend tens of thousands of dollars to go there and yet not get grumpy standing in a line for
Yeah,
2 hours only to
right.
get to the front of the line and say, oh, I'm sorry, the ride is broken down. So for safety reasons,
Right.
don't know when it'll open and no one gets grumpy.
Right.
Um,
You're in the magical place on earth, the most magical place on earth. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So every company has its own uniqueness. There's a lot of theme parks out there, but people know that when they go to Disney, they really do feel that magic. And so it's about property managers, or it goes back to the business leader, the business owner. What is your vision for that company? And, what's your personality that you're infusing into that company? So anyone who represents your brand then represents you and your vision and your promise. And to stand out amongst a sea of property managers out there, because it's really important to understand this, that consumers, the clients, owners, tenants, even vendors sees every property management company as the same. They just think, it's hit and miss depending on the person that's working there. That's sad. So, if we know who we are as a business and then we train our team to represent that promise of experience, service, and results that we give to either the owner or the tenant, then clients will start to see the difference and they'll start to have that spirit of cooperation and that feeling of being connected with that company. And that feeling of connection means that they will work with you. So I think it's time for the industry to stop saying I'm busy, to stop saying I'm just so stressed, or I'm waiting for someone to give me instructions, or there's got to be something better. Stop that thinking, and love what you do and get involved in the vision and the culture and the experience that you're giving the clients. Because if you give that experience to the clients, you're going to experience that as a team member who's representing that company as well. So yeah.
It's all about trust. It's about building that relationship so that you can rely on them and vice versa. Everybody's going to be able to get things done that they need to get done, and there's not going to be any, misunderstandings because you can
Exactly.
always work together to clarify and collaborate.
100%. And we saw this, Adrian, through the pandemic, where the airlines were struggling to get back up in the air. And when they were getting back up in the air, There was a lot of problems, and I fly frequently.
Flight. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I can tell you, I'm a very loyal flyer to One World. So I just choose those airlines. But, there were times when I would arrive and my luggage wasn't there, or I'd be on very, very long flights, like 6 hours, and they forgot to load the catering. So there was no drinks or food. They were bringing the paper cups that they have in in the toilet area. So it's like, the thing is, we were forgiving because the airline shared with us what their struggles were and what their promises were as well. And they were open and honest and transparent. We tend to not be so open and honest and transparent in property management. We more justify, excuse, blame. So we've got to change that mindset, and people will be forgiving, they'll cooperate, but they don't know how to cooperate if we're not sharing the truth. And the truth is never, I'm too busy, or, silly things like that. So, yeah, just know who you are, know your why, know your how, know their why, and how you become their how as a result.
I love that, right? All they want is a comfortable, safe place to live that they can afford. And, when they come home, they don't want to think, ugh, this place, as they're walking up the drive, they want to come in and sit down and go, I'm so glad to be home after a
Exactly.
long day.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
There are places that I've lived where, 6 months went by and I could not wait to get out of there. And other places where I'd rent for 3 years and it would just go by like that because
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it and it was a great place to live. So
Exactly.
building that trust and consistency for sure. So I've got one more question for you, Joe. How important do you think it is for properties to help their tenants save on things other than rent? So, providing perks and offers and deals in the neighborhood, helping them with move-in needs. My real estate agent has a truck here locally, and if you're moving locally, you can go borrow it, things like that. How important do you think it is to add kind of those extras that go beyond the physical environment?
I think that's very important, and it should be done. And the business owner should be always investigating how do we improve the experience for the resident, because those residents, the tenants, they might become investors. And if they have a great experience with you and they've saved money so they can, get a deposit to buy their investment home, they will go to you. And I used to have this a lot as a property manager, where people would come to me and, say, I had a great experience with you. I'm going to invest in your area. Um, and that was a result of, even when I put tenants through quite a hard time when it came to them vacating the property. And
They knew they wanted you on the team, right?
exactly. And they said, even though you made us feel, like uncomfortable, it wasn't an unpleasant uncomfortable. It was more that we realised that, we didn't hand the property back in the way that you had expected, and you wouldn't let us get away with that.
Wow, you don't hear that from a tenant often, huh?
No, exactly. And I had that from a few tenants where I actually ended up managing their properties, because they said,
Wow.
if anyone's going to ensure that, the tenants do the right thing when they move out, it's going to be you, and you made it actually feel good for them. So, it's really important to then look at other ways. How do we service the tenant? Because a lot of tenants these days choose to rent, but they're actually investors as well. So they choose to rent in the area where they want the lifestyle, but they don't want to necessarily put all their money into one property. So what they'll do is, instead of buying, they'll rent in the area, and then they'll have investment properties in, high yield areas, high growth areas. And, that's smart. So tenants are smart too. And if you talk to a tenant and you're talking to them about ways that, they can save money. I mean, you might get a deal on tenant insurance, on utilities, on property monitoring, gardening, pool maintenance, whatever it might be. There are so many areas where we can actually help the tenant to save money. And all it is, it's a package that you offer them. You don't force it upon them. You can say, like, here's some, companies that provide services that you are more than welcome to contact. Mention our name, you will get a discount. Or, like we've already spoken to them and they're waiting for your call if you choose to call them. And it's even right down to rental payments now, Adrian, where the rental payments, there's certain third-party rental payment providers where the tenants get reward cards and discounts on everyday items like shopping and grocery shopping even, which, groceries have gone through the roof lately. So you can imagine if you got even a 5% discount on your shopping, that's a tremendous benefit, to the residents. So, yeah, that's another long answer to your question, but
That's awesome.
you can't go wrong doing it. Go out there and put together a wonderful package for your residents.
Thank you, Joe. Is there anything else that people need to know about the property management industry in 2024?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest things, Adrian, is we are moving into a new era of property management. And if we don't disrupt ourselves, someone else will try to disrupt us. So we have to disrupt from within. We have to embrace technology, and for property managers to understand it's not making their job redundant. They are actually making themselves redundant at the moment because, if you provide a service, you obviously need to have, extra cash profit at the end of it. So to employ someone who cannot work at the capacity of technology or is creating barriers that technology actually opens up and, provides extra time for a human to interact with the clients, because that's what property management is all about, is that human element, and it's tasking. So tasking can be automated. I've got a company called Flusos that it's engineered workflows for property managers. That's where it's going. AI is amazing. So, as we go into the future, property managers need to embrace this technology. Business owners need to have the courage to investigate and implement and train their team to use it. So the end result is the client is going to have a far greater experience because there's more interaction, less, stress from their property manager. And I always say when I do presentations that technology keeps the business humming, but people keep the business human. So it's a combination of both. And yeah, as we go into the future, don't wait to be disrupted. Disrupt from within.
I love that. Thank you so much, Joe.
My pleasure.
Where did your love for purple come from?
That's an interesting question. When I was a little girl, my mother said to me, because I shared a room with my sister, she said, "What would you like in the room?" And I said, "I don't mind as long as I have a purple door to look at." Ever since then, my beautiful purple door, I've just loved purple, and it's a colour that just to me stands out, and it provides kind of like calmness and peace. But what's really interesting, Adrian, is when I did my Disney training, Disney taught us how they do guestology. So they do surveys in the park. And one day they put all of these coloured balloons in the park. And as the guests were walking around the park and leaving the park, they asked them, "Did you see all the balloons in the park today?" And the guest said, "Oh, yes, we did." And they said, "What's the colour that stood out to you most?" And the colour was purple. So you would see that survey was used back in the early days of Disney World. They're changing it now slightly. But when you went to Disney World, the signs all around Disney World were predominantly purple because that was the colour that stood out. So people would see the signs, not get lost, and have that awful experience of getting lost as you go into that huge park at Disney World.
Oh, I love that. And now you're using purple to stand out yourself. Just
Exactly.
full circle, just
It,
coming
it
full circle.
is. It is.
Thanks, Joe.
Lovely. My pleasure.